Hey everyone, my name is Rich, and this is Rich Talks Records, episode number 36. And today, we are going to be talking about the 1985 album by Husker, New Day Rising. Now, why are we talking about this album? It is perhaps not their greatest album, nor is it my personal favorite album. And yet, the reason why we're talking about it here today is because it is the one that I think about the most, and the one that, as the years have gone by, has informed my opinions of Husker the most. So, we're going to get into all of that. This is going to be structured probably similarly to my last video, the Bob Dylan video, where there's going to be me discussing my history with the album and band and perception and all of that stuff. A loose ramble, if you will. And then we will eventually get to album talk. So if you want album talk, you can just skip ahead. So, where to begin with discussing this incredible album? So, the thing about Husker that is interesting for me is that, unlike a lot of my teenage favorites, my opinion about them and my understanding of them has shifted the most over time. So my sort of Sex Pistols aside, and the Clash, I guess, too, but my sort of punk rock trilogy of bands where I really got into what I guess is considered punk music was, of course, Black Flag, the Dead Kennedys, and the Misfits, right? And the Black Flag and Dead Kennedys, I bought those cassettes on the same day. So that's kind of the launching off point for me, right? So Black Flag is interesting, and I made 7 cumulative hours talking about Black Flag. If you haven't seen that, you should check those out if you dare, if you got the guts. But my relationship to Black Flag over the years has only deepened, right? And I hear more and more in it, but I always heard a lot in it, and I just found different aspects to appreciate, and as I delved further and further into live recordings and things like that, I heard more and more in the music and differentiating the different players and eras and all of that sort of stuff, right? But a good example is the Dead Kennedys, where how I felt about the Dead Kennedys at 15 is still basically how I feel about them. My favorite songs, the songs I loved then, I still love now. And, you know, for instance, I still have a hard time making it all the way through Bedtime for Democracy. So I had a hard time with it then, and I have a hard time with it now. So I respect the album. I think it's the hardcore punk equivalent of like a Presence or something, where it's like the distilled, boiled down core of a band, right, really going for it. So I certainly respect it, and I love a lot of the lyrics, and the playing is great and all of that, but I have barely ever been able to get from that album for the first song to the last song, and my relationship to the Dead Kennedys has basically never changed. And what I thought they were and what I thought about them when I was 15 still remains. Husker however, has truly been all over the goddamn map. And that's kind of what I want to talk about. And I'll start off by saying, doing a video about Husker is like a YouTube video, and I'm a guy in his 40s, blah, blah, blah. It should be like fish in a barrel. It's like critics' favorites stuff, and like really easy to sort of, if I was interested in doing so, scoring cred points and coming off as very tasteful and well-informed rock listener or something like that. And that has basically nothing to do with what I like about Husker And so Husker being the nature of them being critics' favorites, I think has, for me, early on, it led to a lot of my misunderstanding of the band and why, for a number of years after my initial infatuation with them, I kind of dismissed them for a long time, and I really didn't rediscover them until maybe like my early to mid 20s. But there was this gap there where I just had absolutely no interest in them, and funnily enough, part of that was because of New Day Rising. So the thing about a lot of like critics' favorites bands, and I want to, I don't really want to name too many names, right? Because I don't want to step on anybody's toes, and people like what they like, and they have the reasons for liking, and that's great. But there are a lot of critics' favorites that have been recommended to me over the years. I mean, like for decades now, that I have checked out a few things here and there, and I've kind of decided that I'm going to strenuously avoid some of that music, and for a number of reasons. But one of the things that bothers me, and I'll go with two kind of safe targets, right? Whether it's like Radiohead or Bruce Springsteen, I tend to... Bands or artists that only make good moves and only make moves that are like approved by critics, I tend to find that music very alienating. And as if you've watched my other videos and my love of things like Love's Revelation or Black Flag's Family Man or any of that sort of stuff, that to me is kind of what I find fascinating. And I'm interested when, if it comes to John Lennon, I'm as interested in Unfinished Music #2, Life with the Lions, as I am She Loves You, as I am the Walrus. All of those things are equally interesting to me. And the fact that he went and made something like Cambridge 1969, or Do the Oz, or Mine Train for that matter, that stuff, I'm as intrigued by that as I am all of the other things that people love his work for, right? And that's part of the deal with Lou Reed. I'm as into Metal Machine music, or even something like Sally Can't Dance, right? The odd zigs and zags, the weird swings, the strange left turns. Dylan being Dylan for me is because he did make records like Self-Portrait, and because he did make that Christmas album, and he did make a triple album of crooner standards, and all of those strange zigs and zags fill out what an artist is supposed to be to me, right? And the really, really simple reduction that Husker Du got sort of branded with, of that you can bifurcate their entire body of work from hardcore to pop rock or college rock, hardcore to college rock, right? That is so reductive and such a oversimplification of such an incredible body, an incredibly resonant and enduring and idiosyncratic body of work. And that's something that really, really gets on my nerves whenever I read critical assessments of them, because I think it kind of misses the point entirely. So the way that Husker Du was sort of presented as a child of the 90s and coming from Nirvana and the popular alt-rock bands of the day, right? The simple equation that Husker Du, the way that they were written about and the way that they were categorized of melody plus noise. And that was always the way that it was pitched, right? Melody, bile and sugar makes something awful. Like, bile and sugar together sounds fucking terrible. But yeah, the melody plus noise, and that just kind of repeated ad infinitum, I think is and then that they were praised for that. Is just so reductive and ultimately, I think, kind of off-putting and does the band a huge disservice. Husker Du were fucking weirdos. They were fucking idiosyncratic They were a weird, idiosyncratic band. They were a true art project band from the very beginning all the way until the end. And when you look at some of the very tasteful critics' favorites, and then you look at all of the moves the Husker Du made, those are two wildly different things. And when you look at some of the people who were influenced by Husker Du, and Grant Hart talks about that in his documentary, where it's like people just wearing a Halloween costume that they're dressing up as a Husker Du influenced multimillionaire musician that year. It really cherry picks some of the most superficial aspects of their music, or it attempts to isolate one thing that they did really, really well. So again, melody plus noise, or a pop band in an anti-pop milieu, all of that sort of stuff. Largely ridiculous, especially as I started to reassess them and then subsequently as all the other years have gone by, and I've spent a lot of time hearing their albums for the first time over and over again, because it does become a continuously new and self-generating, wonderful thing. So to me, there is the Husker Du that critics and a certain part of their audience were wishing that they were, or willing them to be. And then there's Husker Du as they actually are. And those two things are in stark contrast to each other quite often. And when those two things are kind of diametrically opposed, as they are on an album like this, Husker Du gets criticized for it. It was a shortcoming, or a lapse in judgment, or something like that. And there is a failure to take the art on its own terms. And if you've watched my other videos, you will know that that is the key overall overarching stated goal of this channel. So what is interesting, and to the eternal credit of the band members, and Husker Du didn't exist for a longer time than they existed, right? Decades and decades. To their eternal credit, they didn't go back and remix or reimagine the albums. They didn't slap on more user-friendly album covers or reconfigure their iconography. And to that end, obviously, they all deserve credit for that. But I kind of feel like that was ultimately Grant Hart's spirit, I kind of want to say. That there's something in Grant that really kept that honest and really forced people to take Husker Du on it purely on its own terms. And he very, very brutally articulate and adroit in his ability to analyze his own work and analyze the band kind of in the greater context of rock and roll. So I don't want to take anything away from Bob on that one, but just to be clear. So, but my early understanding of Husker Du was unfortunately the really simplistic one. And, again, they were hardcore, then they were college rock, and melody plus noise equals, right? And so very, very, very simplistic. And early on, I considered myself a Bob guy. And talk about being reductive. I totally did projected the Lennon-McCartney equation onto them. And to me, as a 15-year-old, whatever, Bob Mould was the Lennon, right? The bitter, wounded romantic pouring out his guts and playing brilliant, terse guitar. And Grant Hart was obviously then the McCartney, the jolly, eager to please, smiling pop craftsman, right? And, that's not true of John. It's not true of Paul. It's a dumb reduction of either of those two guys, but it's a really ill-fitting and dumb reduction of artists of the stature of Bob Mould and Grant Hart, and it ultimately does a disservice to either of them. For one thing, as I sort of grew to understand Husker Du far more, if anybody was the craftsman in the band, it would have been Bob. So right there, and if anybody was thinking in terms of having a sustainable career in the music industry, even if, I mean, I think he was very realistic that he was never going to sell millions of records or anything like that. But Bob Mould made the moves that he needed to make when he needed to make them, in the same way that McCartney did, and that's not a sellout thing. That's just, he wanted to play music and rightfully so get compensated for doing that. So the split between Bob and Grant and how they sort of viewed the band and what they viewed the legacy of the band was and what the greater significance of the band was can kind of be delineated by looking at the documentation that they chose to leave behind of themselves. So Bob Mould, several years ago, wrote an autobiography, See a Little Light, which I read and I really did not care for. Because it was co-written or ghost-written or whatever with this guy, Michael Azerrad. So my little history with Michael Azerrad goes back to the book that he did with Nirvana. And as you can see, I got this, I want to say, for my birthday in 1993. So, and as you can see, this is the OG copy that didn't have the additional chapters after Kurt was no more. So, but Michael Azerrad wrote a Husker Du chapter in Our Band Could Be Your Life. This is a very important book. I'm really glad that he wrote it. I appreciate the research he did. However, this book points to the greater issue with Michael Azerrad, as well as what was then really bore out with See a Little Light. Michael Azerrad so I've been talking about being reductive. See a Little Light is incredibly reductive, and this book is reductive. Especially in that, again, I understand he had to narrow the scope to something. However, the idea to me that he wrote about Husker Du and the Butthole Surfers in exactly the same way. That, think about how different those two bands are. Think about how different their music is. Think about how different the moves they made were. All of it. Totally, completely different things. And yet he kind of applies the exact same logic system to both of them. And he has a very weird sort of, again, reductive, but like very cause and effect. And what Lester Bangs, when he parodied mid-70s Lou Reed song lyrics, the I walked to the chair, then I sat in it. This very weird, everything is kind of step one and step two and very easily explained. And he did a hell of a job. I mean, I remember being a teenager and being really annoyed at his extremely linear, one direction only, again, reductive sort of idea of Kurt's lyrics, that all of it could just be kind of just easily explained away, and what couldn't be easily explained away was nonsense, and that was sort of it. And so See a Little Light was that just run wild. And Grant Hart did an interview where he posited the theory, and he said, from having sat with Bob for endless hours of his life in vans and practice rooms, etc., that he said, like, I know that guy and he doesn't talk like that. He doesn't think like that. I know him. I've worked with him. I've lived with him. And he posited the theory that the book was probably mostly put together, that Bob would have sat for interviews and then it was mostly put together by Michael Azerrad. And that, to me, makes a lot of sense. The problem with that, of course, and the problem with sort of the getting on board with the criticness and the tastefulness, is that I think it presents Bob's work as less intelligent than it is, because when Bob's work is at its most intelligent, he's actually one of the most prescient, forward-thinking, kind of 4D chess, otherworld fucking geniuses of all time, right? His level of intelligence is, I mean, there are certain songs where I think he might be the single smartest person to ever have written a rock and roll song. So it does that, but I think it also devalues the overall breadth of his creative vision, which leads conveniently to the extremely wonderful documentary Everything that they made about Grant Hart just a couple years before he passed away. And this is a little more sprawling. It really puts the emphasis on Grant, just as it gives him the room to pontificate on any number of subjects, whether it's pianos or Studebakers. He just sort of, they set the camera up and they just sort of let him go. And this is an absolutely phenomenal documentary. It's maybe not quite on the level of like the Robert Crumb documentary, as opposed, like, where you could be a complete stranger to Robert Crumb and watch that documentary and watch the family and the interactions and everything, and it's a compelling movie completely on its own. This, I think, it helps to have at least a passing interest in Grant's music. But it's interesting because this is a far more discursive, take on an artist's life. And it also, while it doesn't necessarily... it's not is it hagiography or hagiography? It doesn't go for... there's no sort of slumming, but also it leaves the viewer to draw their own conclusions about where Grant might have been difficult to deal with or had difficulties. And there's times where he's very frank about certain things, and other times he holds back, and he has every right and reason to do so. And one must respect that. But it is interesting because he talks about the end of Husker Du and how Bob would do these interviews once they got over to Warner Brothers, saying how they were just regular guys and there was nothing special about what they did or anything like that. And they were just like anybody else. And Grant, and I think rightly, properly, says, I never wanted to be like anybody else. I was never trying to be like anybody else, and I was never trying to force myself to be like anybody else. And that he found those aspects of Bob and his public pronouncements on that to be really, really strange. And ultimately, I do think that is... I don't know if it's an insecurity or what that is, but it plays some sort of weird role, and again, kind of undercutting what is so special and unique about his work and about their work and about where they fit in the overall scheme of things in terms of rock music, So that, I think, just the fact that, like, there's this interesting... and also there's the extras are out on YouTube, but you really should hunt a copy down. I also have the film soundtrack, by the way, and if you... Oh, and he makes this collage in the film. But Grant, if you are unfamiliar with his solo work, you could do a lot worse. This is a really good sampling of his solo album, or of his solo output. But at any rate, so I just kind of wanted to lay all that out, and again, how it led to... When it came to an album like New Day Rising, right? If a song didn't fit into the melody plus noise equation, in other words, if it was too much noise or no noise and no melody, in some cases that's the songs apply to that, I didn't really have any understanding of it. And I thought it was it meant that song was somehow a failure, or that the album had shortcomings. And I've seen it referred to as a mid Growing Pains mid-period album, right? And or that it's kind of something of a messy transition album as they work their way out of being a hardcore band or something like that. And again, I think all of that is a totally ridiculous oversimplification of something that is truly, truly creative and truly, truly idiosyncratic and unique. So I talked before in my Black Flag video about the way that they toured, in that the way that they were constantly generating new material. And I talked about that as, I think I called it the Miles Davis model. That's how I usually refer to it. And, you know, the Stooges operated that way. A lot of great bands have adopted that. And that is a grueling discipline and a very, very noble discipline. And there were no stricter adherents to that discipline than Husker Du. And I think that when you look at what their influence is and what the critics tell you their influence is, no bands would make moves like that. The idea that you would be playing set lists that were 2 releases ahead, or even 1 release ahead of what the current album release that you were touring off of, that's totally illogical, right? And that's part of what I think just made them so special. The fact that it was a perpetually moving, perpetually self-generating art project that really did have its own language and aesthetics that made sense unto them. And I think it is interesting when you look at the best of the SST bands. That's really what they all share in common. The Minutemen had their language, Black Flag had their language, Saccharine Trust had their language, the Meat Puppets had their language, and Husker Du had their language. And there's not a ton of crossover, and not much of it has to do with necessarily the Ramones or the Clash or the Sex Pistols or whatever. You know, but what I will say though is the Husker Du does have a direct forebear, which is interesting because none of those other bands really do. But every now and again, a truly great band that is great wholly in and of themselves actually does have some sort of direct forebear. So with Jane's Addiction, you could easily look at the Doors, or, you know, every now and again, you could even make the argument that Sex Pistols to the Stooges, right? And Husker Du had that, and it's interesting that they favorites both of Grant and Bob, that it was a common love that they had, was of the Buzzcocks. And interestingly, the critic, or the person who wants to be reductive, would say, yes, they were catchy pop singles band in a punk milieu. No. The Buzzcocks were also a highly idiosyncratic, highly creative, omnivorous, prolific, constantly self-regenerating art project that hopscotched through these creative phases, and whose lyrics and whose approaches to album production and just the way that they put albums out, and also just the way that they toured, the way that they carried themselves as a band, was wildly forward-thinking and wildly unique, and wouldn't dare be touched by its many so-called acolytes, right? And that is the true, like, Husker Du truly was the American sort of next model of what the Buzzcocks had achieved. Now, so the first album that I ever got by Husker Du was this, the masterpiece, right? 1984's Zen Arcade, right? This is the big one. It's the double album. You know, it's the one that everybody dotes on. So this is the cassette that I bought. It was pre me buying CDs or anything like that. So yeah. So, by the way, just on a fun note, couple, been, I don't know, 2 years later or a year and a half later is when I bought the CD of New Day Rising. And I was with this punk rock guy, who super punk rock. We had a half day of school, and we went to the same record store where I got I got the Black Flag and Misfits and Dead Kennedys tapes. But I was now buying CDs. So I'll never forget, because he was Mr. Punk Rock and Mr. Cred, and you remember what those people were like, right? And they were just complete pains in the ass, and no fun. Now there's a whole different breed of them, because they somehow bred with the offspring of yuppies, and we have that weird strain of human being making everything a fucking drag. But this guy, a real eye roller, and Mr. Cred and Mr. Punk Rock, and I was flipping through the H's hoping to find some Husker Du, and I duly pulled this CD out, and he's standing right next to me, and he apparently approved, and his way of approving was to go, "70s punk, man," and I just was like, I didn't say anything. In the moment, I just went, yeah, right, Sham 69, baby. He wouldn't have even known who they were. And I was like, yeah, but this came out in the mid-'80s. It's okay. But yeah, that was a funny moment. 70s. So there's part of me that whenever I've seen this album cover, 70s punk, man. Well, I mean, yes, they formed in 79, but okay. So anyway, I love that story, because I have relived that many times because it cracks me up. Anyway, so, but this was Zen Arcade. And so this was to my mind, the melody plus noise, the pre-Nirvana, the precursor, all that sort of crap, right? But I really, really fell in love with this album, and especially the second half of it in particular really was, I thought, one of the greatest things that I had ever heard. And I, as a 16-year-old, I got very sick, and I wound up in the hospital, and I now 2 times in my life I have narrowly avoided a coma. This is the first time I narrowly avoided a coma, and after I got out of the hospital and stuff, I had very, very severe depression for about 6 months. So I referred to this period as that I had a nervous breakdown, because I didn't really know what else to call it. And I later found out, years later, that there's actually like a thing that happens sometimes with young people if they get really sort of suddenly sick out of nowhere, where it's like really like dangerous. And then they have a prolonged depression afterwards. So it's actually really common. And so, but I wouldn't have known that back then. All I knew was that I was catatonic most of the time, and spent, pretty much like entire weekends just in my pajamas in my bedroom and listening to music. And I had some John Lennon House Husband mixtapes that I'd made for myself. Like Mirror, Mirror, and She Runs Them Round in Circles, and Beautiful Boy, that sort of stuff. Life's Rich Pageant was a big one. I would listen to that in the morning, but I really listened to this. And, I was in a pretty bad state. And I can honestly say this album saved my life. And what I mean by that is, I remember one particular time having a very rough time, and as ridiculous and teenage as this sounds, the reason that I decided to go on till the next day was, I thought, well, if I off myself, right, I won't be able to enjoy Zen Arcade. I love the album that much. So I was like, I need to keep going if I want to enjoy listening to Zen Arcade again. So, as seemingly ridiculous as that is of a reason, in the moment, it was incredibly profound and incredibly meaningful, because it was a reason to get myself to tomorrow and, any port and storm, right? So, what's interesting is that the album seemed to serve a similar function for Bob Mould, and that he wrote it, and once it was out of his system, he didn't ever really feel the need to revisit it ever again, and he didn't find it, he found it cathartic to write and record, but the catharsis sort of ended there. And Grant Hart posited the idea that it probably should have just been a single album, and that he felt that some of it was, as he put it, gratuitous hardcore. So it's interesting that the album that's held up as their major statement, and the album that is the one, is, for them, part of that sort of weird reductiveness. They didn't want to get reduced to that. And as soon as they had made that statement, they already felt that they were far more than that statement, and that they had already moved beyond it. Also interesting is the fact that this is now the album that I listen to the least of theirs. I love it, and the good parts are as good as anything. I mean, the great stuff is as great as it ever has been. But this is probably the only album that they made that I hear the same way that I did when I was 16, and given that it's been 30 years and I'm not 16 and never will be ever again, even if I wanted to, I certainly wouldn't go back. It's interesting that this one hasn't grown and changed, and yet so much of their other music and their other ideas have grown and changed. And so weirdly, Zen Arcade, the one that's held up as the one, as one of the 10 best albums of the 80s and all of that, is just this little sort of jewel in time that never changes and never gets nearer or further away. It's a strange relationship. However, the reason I say all of that is because New Day Rising was clearly the New Day Rising after Zen Arcade. So that's very interesting that the band wouldn't oversimplify themselves and wouldn't reduce themselves and push themselves out of what they had perceived as the beginnings of hurtling into a creative cul-de-sac. So anyway, let's get maybe now more into album talk, shall we? The one thing I want to say about Husker Du that I just want to kind of do away with very quickly. Why are they one of my favorite bands? Huh? I mean, is it the great songwriting? Is it the importance that they played in influencing the alt-rock of the 90s? Any of that? Well, Bob Mould is one of my favorite guitar players ever. Greg Norton is one of my favorite bass players ever. And Grant Hart is one of my favorite drummers ever. He's like fucking Mitch Mitchell in a hardcore band. Okay? That might have a lot to do with it. I just wanted to sort of state that from the off, that each of them individually would be my favorite member of any other band. Plus, Grant and Bob have amazing singing voices. Oh, and the songwriting genius. And the fact that they are totally iconoclastic and totally unique and followed their weirdo muse, to the fucking end, without a breath of compromise. Oh, it's all of that, right? But I just want to say clearly that about them as individual players. I fucking love each of them, and they would carry a mediocre band all on their own. And then you put those three people together, and oh my god. So, anyway. So, New Day Rising. Recorded July 1984 in Nicolette Studios in Minneapolis. One of the final productions that Spot ever did. The last production that Spot did for Husker Du, and one of the final productions he did for SST in general. Now, in the Michael Azerrad book, there's a lot of, it's not a very pro-Spot book, and as you would have known from my Black Flag reviews, I love Spot. He has now passed away, sadly, but Spot was the fucking man, and I love his production. So, the lore, and I tend not to invest too much in this, was in some sort of war of egos. Now, did Spot ever display some sort of weird crazy ego? Are there any other Spot ego stories? No. Did you see any film footage of Spot or read any interviews with him where he comes off like a haranguing lunatic? No. Yet somehow he's sort of portrayed as coming into town full of piss and vinegar to assert his authority by insisting that the moving desk or the console is moved 2 inches to his exact specifications. Who knows? Maybe the desk was moved 2 inches. There very well could have been a very good reason for that, and lore gets built around it, and who knows? I have never heard anything more about that than the mention in the Azarad book. So one of the many things about Husker Du that often gets talked about is the production. The production is fucking weird on a lot of their records. So here's the thing about Spot's weird production that gets, right? Husker Du had relatively straightforward productions before Spot, but they had a relatively straightforward production on Metal Circus, which he produced. They had weird productions with Spot, such as this. But then, if anything, the production only got weirder after this. I kind of think the weirdest production is on the Warner Brothers albums. So, I refuse to lay that at Spot's feet. The other thing is, Grant's records and Bob's records, with and without Sugar, largely didn't have weird production. This was, in other words, what one has to assume is that for whatever the hell reason, it was an aesthetic decision. Again, they never went back and remixed any of this. They never went back and said, "Oh, we were out of our minds. What were we doing? Oh, they never did that. They never said, "Oh, it was bad mastering." None of that ever happened, right? So the idea that there's some sort of fault in the production is something that I do take issue with. And I will get more into the production as I talk about this record. The other thing about this album is the beautiful artwork. So Grant Hart did the artwork. He did pretty much all of their artwork, but I forget the name of the lake that this was shot at. In the extras, in Everything. By the way, Everything is free on Tubi. So go watch it. It's really, 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 really worth your time. Trust me on this. But anyway, in the extras that are out there on YouTube, he actually goes to the location. Is it Clear Lake? Maybe. But it's just funny being a Midwest boy myself. It's just funny to see a photo like this because in the Midwest, this is what you do in the summer. You go to places that look like this. So I love that. And I love that as an album cover, especially as a punk rock album cover. And I also love Grant's beautiful, we're going to invert everything from above the horizon line idea. Amazing. Really, really, really cool. And then just as a piece of photography, as a beautiful, beautiful meditative piece of outdoor photography. The back cover is absolutely gorgeous. Now, I don't remember when I bought this. God only knows. It would have been at some point in the, 2000s maybe. As always, we have Run Out Groove messages, so I will read them. And this is, nope, that's side 2. That's what I thought. Side 1 is... Here in the midst of graveyards that push up light. That's good. And then on side 2, we have... I'll trade you 2 good Sherlings for 10,000 dead Midwestern Indians. So anyway, but the album, the vinyl sounds really, really good. So, vinyl sounds great. Funnily enough, I think the CD also sounds great. And again, we're going to sort of be getting into that. So, and yes, I'm going to express some hesitations here and there and the occasional frustration, but, whatever. I contradict myself. I fucking contain multitudes, right? So anyway, I'm going to be mostly referring just to the CD because I forget songwriting credits and things like that, right? So anyway, so away we go. So, it's a whole band credit? Yeah. So the title track begins the album. Beautiful churning guitar. Bob Mould has one of truly the ultimate guitar sounds in the entire history of rock and roll. In my little world, it's as iconic as Johnny Thunders or Chuck Berry or anybody else, like, or what John and George were doing in the late 60s, especially around the time of the White Album, the guitar sound on the Revolution single, all that sort of stuff. What Pat Smear achieved, what Tony Iommi achieved, what Greg Ginn himself achieved, especially in the early Black Flag EPs. Like, Bob is right up there. I mean, he is truly one of my favorite guitar players. He's one of those people, like, basically every single note he chooses to play is the right note. It's like the perfect notes in the perfect order. And then there is that guitar sound. I don't even know how I could begin to describe that guitar sound, other than it is the sound of somewhere out deep in the Milky Way. It's the sound of the storms around Saturn or Jupiter, I suppose, mixed with the sound of the ocean. It's one of the ultimate sounds. It's one of the pre-birth sounds that I think if you hear it, resonates deeply somewhere in the back of your psyche. Again, kind of like a Keith Levine, kind of like some of Lou Reed's stuff in the Velvet Underground. There are just certain guitar sounds that are sort of all powerful and, I don't know, have somehow existed for thousands of years, and he hit upon that sound. So I remember in Mark Prindle's reviews, he did not care for the change in Bob Mould's guitar sound around this time. I completely disagree. I love it. It is vast and absolutely perfect. It truly is one of my favorite sounds in the world. So it begins not unlike something I learned today, but it goes into this incredible gospel fervor, one just repeated lyric, and the band playing frantically, beautifully, vividly, brilliantly, feverishly, and Grant's screamed vocals and Bob's screamed frantic vocals. And, well, the thing about this album is, and I had said this about Black Flag's Loose Nut, but like Black Flag's Loose Nut, like The Doors' Waiting for the Sun, like Funkadelic's Cosmic Slop, this is the sound of a self-consciously dark band attempting to, or not an innately dark band self-consciously attempting to shed some of its darkness and greet the next day, or have some sort of shift in tone because the darkness and the agony has gone as far as it's ever going to go. So it's a beautiful, beautiful mission statement. Simple, pristine song played by some of the greatest players in the history of the fucking musical form. What more could you want? And then we go straight into Jesus. We go straight into fucking Grant's The Girl Who Lives on Heaven Hill. If you want to make the melody plus noise argument, and that's what makes Husker Du great, and that's and their ability to influence the rock radio landscape of the 90s into the 2000s, if you want to make the case, sure, right? But my God, it needs to be said, they really were fucking brilliant at it. My God. Grant has talked about the fact that he never really felt super comfortable writing in the hardcore idiom, and that didn't really suit his songwriting, and you feel that here. The Girl Who Lives on Heaven Hill is just an amazing, beautiful, visionary piece of songwriting. This, as a song, probably could have been, I mean, it could have been one of the Jack Bruce contributions to like Wheels of Fire. It could have been on the first Traffic album. I mean, you can hear how a song like this, it could have been a Small Faces song, perhaps like a slightly less eccentric Small Faces song. It could have been a late 60s Kinks song. But it is absolutely gorgeous, beautiful, beautiful, vivid, poetic lyrics. Grant has talked about the fact that he was not as prolific as Bob. He compared Bob to Kerouac and himself to Ginsberg, and it's not for nothing the Ginsberg reference, because the writing and his ability to be imagistic is just absolutely impeccable. Beautiful, beautiful lyrics. And but what's interesting, and the part of the thing about Grant is Grant has, I want to say, one of the great voices in all of rock and roll, no matter what the genre of it is. That it's got so much attitude, it's got so much emotional believability, so much reality, but also just melodic and gorgeous. It's a absolutely beautiful instrument. And I love his singing. It's so goddamn good. But that melody, that and the cascading waves of Bob's guitar playing, and all again, like all of Bob's note choices and what he interjects, just beautiful, absolutely beautiful. But what's interesting is, as much as Grant wasn't comfortable in this is his own words, in a hardcore idiom, it builds to a screaming frenzy. The vocal performance does. The tempo doesn't really accelerate. And I don't know that you could have had something. I think if Husker Du had come out in the early 70s or something, or in the late 60s, I don't know that they would have necessarily had the, I don't know, not comfort, but willingness to be that raw or that emotionally vulnerable and wide open to express to take it and express it in express so much anguish out of the lyric. So, it may not be hardcore, but it's hardcore, and it's a hardcore vocal performance. And again, something the legions of imitators utterly miss, because none of them would go into this completely wild, fucking screaming finish of like the last verse, especially. So, a monumental, beautiful, painful, but just perfect song, and one of Grant's absolute gems. I'll just throw in here, this is the album that began the fracture within Husker Du, because Grant would have had another gem on this album, and that's, of course, 2541, which became the signature song of his solo years. Bob Mould, apparently the story goes that Bob Mould dismissed it as sounding too much like a song by the Dream Syndicate. I have never heard a single note of the Dream Syndicate, so I cannot comment upon that aspect of things. If you are a fan of the Dream Syndicate and you have any recommendations, if anything you'd like to suggest, please leave below in the comments. I would be happy to check them out. They're just one of those bajillions of fucking bands that I just have never gotten around to, and don't know where to start. So, throw it in if you feel so inclined. So then we move into the third song, I Apologize. One of Bob's true gems. So, and when I was first, as a teenager, as a Husker Du fan, melody plus noise, that was the thing, is I sort of thought that all of the songs were supposed to be like I Apologize. Like, I got I Apologize. I didn't get a lot of these other songs. And I really thought that it was some sort of like, oh, well, they just didn't write that many good songs. Like, I was so silly about it. And again, I think that that's one of the reasons why a lot of the writing around them and a lot of the way that they have just been sort of fixed in a canonized way is really misinformed. So, but anyway, I hopefully, I think I've probably hammered away a lot at that one, and probably will a little bit more as we go along. But I Apologize is I mean, come on, it's absolutely perfect. It's as good. It's as good as anything on a hard day's night. I mean, it's just it is mastery and perfection of the form. I mean, my God, just absolutely gorgeous, and just like a perfect melodic gem of a rock and roll song, right? And you can totally take it on that level, and you can sing along with it, and you can be enraptured in the melodic sweep and the joy and the restrained power as the band echoes away in the chorus, and hits all those accents just beautifully in sync with each other. You can totally enjoy it for all of that. Or you can slightly dig away a little further. And what I find so interesting about the song, and what I love so much, and maybe this is a really terrible interpretation, and maybe it is as lovely and beautiful, and oh, he's apologizing, and oh, isn't that wonderful? I've come to hear the song very differently. And it dawned on me one day. I was blaring the album as I was driving to work, and all of a sudden I heard the song completely differently, and I've never unheard it since I heard it this way. And I don't think the song is about like, oh, I hurt you, and maybe we both made mistakes, but I apologize, and now we're gonna hold hands and sail off into the sunset together, and it's just gonna be the mostest. What I think it is I think it's actually better than that. I think it's deeper than that. I think it's a lot more interesting than that. And that is, I think that whole thing of the chorus of "said I'm sorry," and you have Grant's angelic, mellifluous, floating, drifting harmony, and just angelic answer response of "said I'm sorry," and it carries off. But what it really is, what comes after that is it's sweetening it up. It's drawing you in, it's charming you, it's beguiling you. But what happens immediately after that? Bob sings, "Now it's your turn to look me in the eyes. Apologize." That's what it's all about. It's not that he's had this reckoning. It's that he wants to fucking hear you say it. He's making you own up. And if he has to fucking sweet talk it a little bit, he's gonna fucking get what he needs to hear out of you. Interesting, dark, strange, fucking, but real. Like, that's real psychological shit. That's what people really do to each other. People were doing that to me when I was a child, and I was too stupid to realize what was happening to me. I fell for the sorry, and god damn it, you get fucking pulled in. It's actually a much more compelling song than just, oh, I'm opening up my heart and I'm owning up to my faults. There's a hell of a lot more going on. Brilliant songwriting. This is like top level fucking genius songwriting. And the fact that you have it wrapped up in, again, these just cascading beautiful melodies and that gorgeous recurring chordal riff. I mean, my God, how can you not sail along with that? And also Grant's drumming on it is fucking fantastic as well. So anyway, but interesting, they have what could be their most obviously appealing song, what could be their most obviously crowd-pleasing song. And then we go into this weird speed freak song, Folklore, also written by Bob. And what a weird chorus, like weird harmonies, the sort of middle section, which I guess would be the bridge, which seems like it's all going to sort of veer out of control and hydroplane around itself. Really interesting lyric, social protest, but kind of intelligent social protest. Interesting, and certainly ends with a point of where you Can't fight that logic. So a really cool, weird little song. It's 94 seconds. And then we go into another weird little song, this time by Grant. A beautiful, succinct. So, New Day Rising was an example of extremely minimalist songwriting. If I Told You is another. The lyric looks like a haiku, and again, just a little over 2 minutes, but perfectly constructed. Again, idiosyncratic, because it's not just like some sing-along pop punk crap, or it's not making obvious verse chorus bridge guitar solo moves. So, again, interesting, intriguing songwriting, and the idea that they follow up. You have the declamatory opening statement, gem from Grant, gem from Bob, and then these two weird fragments that kind of just exist in the middle of side one on their own logic, And then we have one of the supreme achievements from the great Bob Mould. We have Celebrated Summer. I don't know that songwriting really gets that much better. What's interesting about Celebrated Summer is a little like being an American hearing French. Right? You hear French and you're like, creme brulee. That sounds very beautiful and, again, mellifluous, right? Creme brulee. And then you find out that it just means burnt. Is it burnt cream or burnt sugar? I think it's burnt cream, right? Like, that's it. Like, it's just and that's sort of how the French are, like super weirdly blunt and matter of fact, right? But it sounds, and it's like aesthetically beautiful, right? So, Celebrated Summer is kind of like that, because it's interesting, because they are kind of weirdly flat and prosaic lyrics, and yet, right? First of all, Bob's guitar playing, like that, I don't even know what you call it, part, riff, whatever, melodic signature on the guitar. But that vocal melody explodes away from the guitar chords and is absolutely goddamn fucking beautiful. I mean, that is one of the best fucking melodies ever fucking written. Like, if there's any justice in this world, that melody will be remembered like 400 years from now. That, good God, is it stunning, and that chorus and the way Bob sings it, and there's just so much expression in it, and the expressiveness. I mean, it took a lot of guts, right, to make a record, especially like side 2 of Zen Arcade. And when I say side 2, I mean side 2 of the first disc, right? The hardcore suite, right? And it took a lot of guts to write those songs. It took a lot of guts to rip yourself to shreds like that, right? But it's another thing to be that expressive about subtler and more nuanced emotions and more complicated emotions. And Bob is able to, however many months after, I want to say Zen Arcade was done in October of 83, and this is July of 84, so a little more than half a year later, like, the fact that he's grown that much as a singer. And now, I don't know the musical term. When you hold a musical phrase when you're singing, and you hold extend the phrase in the middle of the phrase, it's called a melisma. I know that. But I don't know what it's called when you hold it at the end of the phrase. But Bob does that here to incredible effect, and his voice goes down into the lower part of his register, and he turns the line "getting out of hand" into having so much like weird emotional resonance, and it makes you think back on all the episodes of your life, and the people you knew, and the places you were, and what you were, how he's able to convey that solely through the power of holding a note and then bending it. And it's just such a goddamn fucking beautiful vocal performance, you know? And then, out of nowhere, we go far, far away from punk rock world. And what do we have? We have the introduction of this arpeggiated acoustic part. Again, gorgeous. And also, again, about the weird production. You know, notice all the weird sort of like wind tunnel shit goes away when the acoustic guitar comes in, and it really is that beautiful. And then that quick ramp up when the rhythm section kicks back in and they're off and running again. I mean, I've used this phrase before. This is and this would certainly go for I apologize, but really, 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 really celebrated summer. This is truly one of the most compulsively listenable songs ever recorded, and to listen to it is pure like melancholic joy. I mean, does the album cover tell you the story, right? Like, unbelievable. I mean, this is like, and just the fact, I don't know, just the fact that they were able to write at such a ridiculously high level. Oh my God. Just stunning. I mean, it's one of the greatest songs ever fucking recorded, you know? It gets me every time. It really does. So anyway. And then side one ends. Like, that should be the big side ender, right? That should be the climax, the celebrated summer. There it is. But it doesn't. It ends with Perfect Example. It ends with another, like, how long is Perfect Example? So it's a little over 3 minutes. Like, again, this really weird, distended song with the band. Like, Grant does an amazing job of holding back and just playing like the straight rhythm, and the guitars are all like, again, as a series of textural experiments. I don't know how you could really say that this album has bad production, because Perfect Example, like, they're playing with sound and space. They're moving things around. I think it's really, really interesting and really, really creative and cool. This could have totally just been a straightforward production, right? And it would have been like a fucking home run. Like, Husker Du came at it from weird angles, just like their songwriting comes from weird angles. Just like having it inverted above the horizon line is a weird angle, you know? It's part of the greatness to separate that out. To separate out the inversion, to make something other than Perfect Example the side ender. All of that defeats the point of what Husker Du is. It's not melody plus noise, right? It's melody plus everything else. So, yes, there's noise, but there's also abstractions. There's things you're never going to understand. There's weird textural experiments, and forget about the influence on alt rock and bands becoming bajillionaires later on in the 90s and 2000s. This is really, to me, they're the starting point of what you, I guess, would call shoegaze. I mean, to me, they're actually the starting point of what would later come out with like My Bloody Valentine, or by the time you get into Daydream Nation, or some of the beautiful overflowing guitar orchestrations like on Goo, and like side 2 of Goo, and some of that stuff. Like they're incorporating all of these other elements, but they're not doing like big 10-minute epics. They're not using, like, this is still guitar, bass, and drums. And the fact that they're able to extract all of that and create all of these different sound worlds on damn near each song, where each song practically has its own sonic identity, and yet that's Grant playing, that's Greg playing, and that's Bob. But it's all the different shades of what Bob's guitar can do, and all the different places he can take it. And then you have this really, really weird, ultra vulnerable, he sounds inconsolable vocal performance, where, I mean, it sounds like it was like recorded in a therapy session or something. And just the fact that it's that vulnerable, and the way that they're playing with spacing, and it's a beautiful, really interesting side opener. And the emotional overload of Perfect Example is what informs the beauty of I Apologize and Celebrated Summer, and gives it even more breadth and texture and depth, right? So you can't just isolate the melody plus noise. All of it works beautifully in contrast with each other. It's part of a larger whole of expression. This is beautiful, beautiful stuff. This is such a fucking unbelievable band, and so with that, we're gonna flip the record over. So side two of New Day Rising begins with another Grant Hart masterpiece, Terms of Psychic Warfare. Now, this song is, first of all, beautiful bass playing from Greg Norton. I feel like I haven't talked about Greg Norton enough on this. I love his bass playing. I love his melodic counterpoint style. And I think, I know that Bob and Grant have at various points sort of taken shots at him. Grant also said some really, really nice things about Greg too. But he's a great focal point on stage. He was a ball of energy on stage, and just an amazing player. And I don't know, as far as songwriting goes, I don't know that it would have made sense for him to try to contribute. The records are already kind of overstuffed as it is, So you had these two guys vying for, friendly competition, So at any rate, I just want to sort of say again, Greg Norton fucking rules. So anyway, but great bass line, and then just like kind of awesome steamrolling guitar from Bob. But what's interesting about the song is it's a really like classic, like rock and roll strut, like with different production in a different day and age. It would have made all the sense in the world on the Nuggets. It's like Manfred Mann's Do a Ditty or something like that. Or the Question Mark and the Mysterians or something. It's fucking fantastic. And just the roll, the rocking. I mean, they do a lot of rocking, but this is roll. This is pure roll. And the fact that they're just able to play that groove and is just a testament to how fucking awesome they are. And again, they would do this live. So Grant is able to hold that rhythm and sing live, and like the phrasing off of the drum. Like, can you imagine? Like, that's absolutely incredible. So this is like, I think, one of the absolute peaks of anything Husker Du ever did. I think it's one of Grant's greatest songs. The lyrics are just, again, like classic rock and roll, like setting it up and knocking it down, setting some dumb motherfucker straight, somebody who needs to be set straight. And but then there's the voice, and there are three voices really. So this is a vocal extravaganza from Grant. So you have the main lead vocal, which is nothing but fucking brimming with proper rock and roll attitude, right? He sounds great. He sounds born to sing rock and roll, right? So beautiful, beautiful voice, and kind of in that McCartney-esque way that Paul could do the Little Richard stuff, and not that this is not that, but just in the same way that Paul, like, and that is where there is a similarity, that Paul had such an innately perfect vehicle for putting melodies out into the world. That's how Grant's voice is, but it also is an outstanding rock and roll instrument at the same time. It really is able to be both, or both at the same time. But then you've got Grant's harmony vocal, wavering harmony vocal over the top of that, which is just like a whole sort of another level of, for lack of a better way of putting it, hook of god damn that's good, like god damn that's good arranging. In the same way that the different shifting guitar textures in Celebrated Summer is like perfect arranging. That vocal hook that he throws in, the wordless vocal hook, or maybe it's O's or Yaz. Jesus, like, again, that's perfect beautiful arranging, and talk about range. I mean, the fact that they can go as weird and abstract as they do, or as excoriatingly intense as they get, but then they can do something like this that's just fucking, like, it just hits that nerve of like fuck, that's good, and again, compulsively listenable. But then, and this is where I am going to contradict myself, I would love a remix of this album, or I would love my man Mark Lynette I would love to see like a 2 or 3 disc version of this where they do separated tracks and stuff, because some of the greatest singing that Grant Hart ever did in his entire life is buried away in the harmony. And if you listen really close on headphones, you can hear that high note that he hits in standing. I always forget the standing by the sea, like he's doing that stuff. He's doing like way crazy fucking falsetto answer harmonies. Oh my god, it's some of my favorite singing that he ever did, and you have to strain to listen to it. I would love to get like a acapella mix of just that, where you could hear just him, because that is fucking amazing. And then, again, Bob's guitar playing is absolutely outstanding, and again, like, so much attitude, and so much, like, as much as he was clearly informed by like Roger McGuinn and all of that, he really was also informed by punk, and there is that like that Johnny Thunders side of his playing, like a real like raw rock and roll side to his playing, and he's able to kind of like let loose a little bit more on Grant's songs. And I'm not the first person to say that. Pop Culture Graveyard did an amazing video about Husker Du a couple years ago, and the guy talks about that on that video, which is really, really good. So speaking of Bob Mould's guitar playing, the next song, 59 Times the Pain, is a really, really fascinating from like a compositional standpoint, because it's a really odd, lopsided song, and it sort of is the opposite extreme of Perfect Example, where it's so knotted and agonized, and it is the sound of a migraine turned into a song, and truly like agonized. But the different guitar parts that Bob writes, and the 59 Times the Pain lick is an amazing lick, and could be the basis of a song for anybody else. But that's just one part of it, and I absolutely love it. It's so intense, but also just so interesting, and also like vividly believable, of course, and just again like a great counterpoint to what you just heard, that you could have something that has that real like rock and roll swing to it, and then you go into something this knotted and contorted, but also really like, again, viscerally like powerful, and and that you are immersed in it. So another like amazing song from Bob. And then we get into Powerline, which is like just ahead of maybe something that could have been on like Nothing Shocking, or other, and maybe even some 90s stuff, like beautiful, like wide open Break of Dawn fucking bass playing from Greg Norton, and then again really intriguing oceanic guitar stuff from Bob, and kind of like, also like Perfect Example, they're playing with texture, and they're playing with stereo placement, they're playing with foregrounding different aspects, and it's so unique and such an interesting mix, and but also, again, like Perfect Example, so interesting compositionally, and then Bob's weird, echoey, distended vocal, a beautiful song, a really, really interesting song. I love it. Like, again, just another like a song that you can listen to like 4, 5, 6 times in a row because it's totally unto itself and totally unique, and yet it somehow fits into the larger whole of this. And again, I know I'm belaboring the point, but it shows why it's foolish to separate out the easier to digest moments or the more obviously enjoyable moments, because it is part of this whole. It is part of this, of something that has like complete aesthetic fullness in its expression, and it's just absolutely beautiful and absolutely like vital to the, I don't know, to the environment building that this album does. So again, another like beautiful creative song. And then we get to, you know, you have to take the strange experiments and you have to take the odd digressions and the weird back roads, because then you get slam bang into this totally unique, totally original fucking song by Grant Hart, his final gem of the album. Amazing. Books about UFOs, the hilariously clangy, overly loud piano that sounds like something from like a New Orleans R&B record from the late 40s or early 50s, crossed with I don't even know what, crossed with Mike Garson's playing on Aladdin Sane or something. It's just and matched against Bob's guitar playing, right? Like the fucking bisected volcano meets deep space meets the ocean that is Bob Gould's guitar playing, right? And just but again, like Terms of Psychic Warfare, it moves and has a swing and a roll to it that is fantastic. And then you've got Grant's vocals. Like Grant is totally, so in the same way that like I was talking about how I give a lot of credit to Bob for being willing to be that vulnerable and open emotionally on Perfect Example. Like this is again another part of that range, another part of this complete whole idea that you're getting with albums by this band, because each one of their albums, it really is a world unto itself. And as I've said before about other great albums, plays like a film or a novel or some sort of fascinating life experience that is wholly unique unto itself. So anyway, travel or whatever, so Grant's voice on this is totally just so free and so expressive and so absolutely beautiful and so fearless and also like really like charming and it makes you fucking love him. It makes you love the band. It makes you love the song. It makes you love being alive. Like this is the new day rising. This, Zen Arcade made me want to live to the next day, but this makes me excited about the day that I'm currently in. And God damn it, it's just absolutely fucking perfect. And the lyrics are also amazing. I mean, Grant's lyrics, and that's, by the way, I forgot to mention in Terms of Psychic Warfare, one of my favorite lines in any song ever: all the silver you can steal can't buy a piece of what I feel. God damn, that's fucking good lyric writing. Fucking hell. Anyway, the lyrics, again, really cool, really interesting, really creative, beautiful. Grant does what great songwriters do. He gets the details right. Perfect. Like every single detail is perfect. He could have written 25 drafts of this and not done a better job, right? He just nails it all the way down the line. And Bob unleashes an absolute corker of a solo, beautiful, like rip-roaring kind of 50s style, like, but Bob's playing his guitar like it's a piano. I mean, he's kind of doing like penny ante rolls on the guitar. Like, it's just fucking fantastic. It's so it's so infectious, for lack of a better word, compulsively listenable, fucking perfect. And also some of the, again, kind of in the same way that some of Grant's best vocals are sort of buried in terms of psychic warfare, some of his best piano playing is kind of buried, like the weird, the weird clanging parts that are sort of really, really, like, in the fade out at the end. Like, I love all that stuff. Absolutely gorgeous. I love his playing on this, and his piano playing, and just the groove and swing. This is the band that made fucking Zen Arcade 7 months before, and they're doing this. It's the range is incredible, and also I will just add, not for nothing, their range when they were a hardcore band is also incredible, because, you know, again, I will at some point do more Husker Du videos. Like, each of these albums is so extraordinary. I mean, Everything Falls Apart is extraordinary. Land Speed Record is extraordinary. Metal Circus, especially with the additional outtakes that they put out a few years ago, you can just kind of make an album out of that. Zen Arcade is a masterpiece. What they did after this, you know, and also, by the way, that's one of the other reasons I wanted to make New Day Rising its own, because the album that comes after this, Flip Your Wig, both of these were released in 1985. However, this was recorded in 84, this was recorded in 85. People, and especially critics, love to join these two albums together and sort of have you think that it's kind of like a double album, or if they took the best out of this and the best out of this, they'd have the greatest album of all time, and they could have been the Nirvana of the... No, they couldn't have. They were never going to be. They didn't have they didn't have the temperament for it. It was never going to, or it would have ended as quickly, okay? So, you know. So, but these are two completely different albums. These are two completely different statements, and have two completely different sets of ideas. And someday I will totally talk about Flip Your Wig. And it was a little bit of a coin toss for me to not talk about Flip Your Wig. But I wanted to really separate it, because no, I think this is its own statement that stands very fucking well on its own. Thank you very much. So, and just the way Grant lets out the woo at the end, like, it's joyous, it's beautiful, it is fully alive, it is rock and roll, it's a beautiful thing. It's my favorite art form. It's the thing I love so much, right? So, extraordinary. And then we get to the next song, and the Bob, pretty much Bob all the way out for the rest of this. So I don't know what you're talking about. So I don't know what you're talking about is an excellent, fast, angry, hard, beautifully written rock and roll song. I love it. It's, again, it completely fits into this universe, and I think that it makes a lot of sense as a nice contrast to folklore. Bob had such a great way of doing that. For, you know, there's In a Free Land, but then there's songs like Real World. Like, I love that about him, and I think he's just so good at creating these balances between you know, ideology or and practice, or ideals and actual real life of real people like that. I just think he's so great at portraying these things, and I Don't Know What You're Talking About is another example of that. And just a fantastic, you know, just such a fantastic piece of writing from a compositional standpoint, but then, and then, as I said, how it relates back to the rest of the record. An amazing song. Love it. The next song is called How to Skin a Cat. And we hate this song because it's literal violence. Jesus. You have any idea how hard it was to get her down here? God damn. Anyway, could you imagine if I actually believed that and actually thought that way? You wouldn't be watching this channel at all, would you? Anyway, How to Skin a Cat That was a lot of effort to pull that shot off. I hope it was worth it. I hope you got a chuckle. Anyway, it's interesting, for all of the supposed discord between them and SST and them and Black Flag, blah, blah, blah. And all that happened later on. For one thing, Grant started off his solo life at SST. So, anyway, How to Skin a Cat sounds remarkably like something that could have been off of Side 2 of Family Man. It has the same weird, upside down, bizarro world Greg Ginn guitar style. And I'm kind of shocked that I always thought that could have been him, kind of in the same way that it's clearly Greg on a few songs on the Big Heist album. I always kind of assume oh, maybe Greg was there that day. I don't know. But at any rate, it isn't. That's just Bob channeling Greg. But the weird sort of odd asymmetrical playing of it. And it is a strange sound experiment. Again, kind of like Powerline, but this is more of a sort of Beefheartian spoken word piece. That, given that there is not a transcription for the lyric, no lyrics in here, but given that there's no transcription for the lyric, I'm assuming that maybe it was extemporized. I don't know. Excuse me, but I love it. It's a strange, repetitive, ugly, intentionally ugly composition, song, but I still love it, and I love it because you can't untangle, you cannot, Husker Du is like the wall of a city. There's all these things on the wall of the city, right? And part of what's on the wall is there's a wild patch of strawberries growing against it. And you look at some of the graffiti, and you look at some of the old architecture, and you could admire that, and you could admire the nature around it and all of that. And in the middle of that, you pluck a strawberry, and you're like, God, that's a good strawberry. Boy, that tastes amazing. Right? And what wound up happening, of course, was they took that strawberry and they concentrated it and concentrated it and concentrated it and boiled it down and extracted the flavors and chemicalized it, and you wind up with, some strawberry syrup that they put on a cake at some stupid chain restaurant or something that bears no relation to strawberries in any way, shape, or form. How they taste, what they look like, their coloring, anything. It becomes utterly dissected from nature, right? And that's the thing with Husker Du. You have to take the How to Skin a Cat's with the Celebrated Summers. You got to have them both, and to extract one or to say, oh, this is a misfire, or I don't like this, misses the entire point. Really, these albums are artifacts that are like Howard Finster's Garden. I know that REM sort of claimed Finster, and then Talking Heads used for the Little Creatures record, but really, this is the musical equivalent of going through Howard Finster's Whirligig Garden or any of that stuff, right? And they are bizarre curiosity shops, and this is what free artistic voices produce, right? They're not just going to make 10 or 12 interchangeable songs of the same genre to sort of keep you, be background for you. And they were true artists who made truly creative artistic albums. So, and even as something as intentionally ugly and strangely off-putting as How to Skin a Cat, I love it. I always enjoy listening to it. It's wild. I love when Grant and, I guess all of them, but when they break into the more manic part, and then it goes back to the asymmetrical sideways shit. I love it. It's awesome. So anyway, and you just gots to have it there, So then we have What You Drinkin', which is, I think, just a little over a minute. Let me look. It is 1:30. Yep. So kind of like 59 Times the Pain, another like brutally kind of knotted, contorted song that just like sort of can't get like around itself in terms of how furious it is with its circumstances in life, right? And my understanding, I could be wrong about this, but I'm pretty sure Bob quit drinking around this time, like quit alcohol, and this was sort of his reflection on his time, being, drinking a lot. So it's a really, it's a really powerful, thrashy, cathartic song. I love it. Like I mean, I just think they were so amazing at writing stuff like this, and that they could just knock these sorts of things out. The other thing is, I think as they went on over the course of Flip Your Wig and Candy Apple Grey and Warehouse Songs and Stories, this was kind of, this was kind of the end of a certain strain of Husker Du song where they would be that minimalist with their compositions. They tended to go, with a few exceptions here and there, they tended to go for more fully, certainly by the time you get to Candy Apple Grey, right? They get to more fully fleshed out sort of song forms and more classically developed song forms. So this is, enjoy it while it lasts, because I love that they would write stuff like this. I always thought that they were great at writing these odd, contorted songs that really come from strange angles. And this is a great one. And another, like, super, super minimalist lyric. So the fact that, you have Grant and Bob able to write really beautiful, interesting, thought-provoking, provocative lyrics, and then that they're able to just keep it down to like a line or two, is another, it says again a lot about their range and the breadth of what they did. And then the album ends with Plans I Make, a riff that could truly be like an early like thrash riff. And that I actually had noticed that when I was a teenager with Zen Arcade. There was a few songs where I kind of got that feeling. And as given that I wasn't that far removed from heavy metal world at that point, I loved that aspect of them. I thought that was really cool, and there was something like really like satisfying about that. So this could kind of be like almost like a Celtic Frost, or maybe Trouble, but maybe perhaps even a Venom kind of riff. Like it has that intensity. Maybe like maybe kind of something off of oh god, I'm forgetting the Slayer record. Is it Show No Mercy? I'm forgetting the name of it. Which one is that, or Haunting the Chapel? I want to say Show No Mercy. We'll say Show No Mercy. I could be wrong if I'm thinking of the right one. But it has, but it has that sense to it. And I don't think that they were terribly informed by heavy metal, but there is an interesting metallic aspect and thrashy, early thrashness to some Husker Du writing. And I'm trying to think. I want to say I vaguely remember. Maybe it was Metallica. I vaguely remember one of the first times I ever saw the name Husker Du was an old issue of Circus magazine. I would have gotten some back issues from Circus, and I want to say that I think it was Metallica or maybe it was Anthrax who was into Husker Du. So I do think maybe they were picking up a little bit on that as well. Who knows? But at any rate, furious riff, amazing riff, really powerful and like really like hot and overdriven in that spot kind of way. And Plans I Make is again like should be like What You Drinking. Like, it should be like, or 59 Times the Pain, it should be like a furious, contorted, Bob Mould piece of, like, psychodrama. But instead, what's interesting is it kicks out and becomes a lot more expansive. And they go into kind of maybe reminiscent a little bit of some of the stuff on Land Speed Record, but they really go off into somewhat more expansive sort of free jazz noise territory where the rhythm sort of opens up more, and I absolutely love that, and it becomes this really fucking fantastic, like 10 out of 10 album freak out, like a proper album freak out, the way, like ending an album the way that it should. And what's interesting is, as opposed to Zen Arcade, or where there's all this pain and whatever, the anger here, there's kind of like the ending of Loose Nut. There's some sort of weird zeal and joy within the anger, and it's somehow not just anger for anger's sake. There's the joy or the endorphins kicking in of these guys making this sound at the same time, and the swell and the power of that, and riding along the waves of that, where everybody's actually having a really good time. And I think, anger gets a bad rap, and I thank God Almighty for my anger. My anger has actually really helped. It has helped keep me alive all these years. It certainly counteracts depression. So it's a hell of a motivator, and it marches you forward. And yes, there's an aspect of it that's playing with fire. I get that, but rock and roll is fire, and you are playing with fire by being into rock and roll. It's kind of the deal that you make with yourself, and it's a beautiful, beautiful ending to the album. A great freak out, a great set of Bob just using his guitar as a noise device. I honestly wish they had done this more. I wish they had gone further with it. I wish somebody had encouraged them to do like a 10 or 15 minute side closer of, you know what I mean? Like I wish there had been somebody saying, hey, you guys should pursue this even further, because they were really, 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 really fucking good at it. And I think when you have that much compositional skill and that much melodic skill, there's going to be an interesting musicality to it no matter what. So I would have loved to have seen them pursue that. I think that would have been really, really cool. But it's what we get here is fucking awesome. And then how does the record end? They're joking around with Spot. You hear them joking around with Spot and saying, it's the last song on the record. And it ends with just this sort of live studio dialogue, and it's great, and I love it. And I love the liveness of it, and I love the humanness of it. I love the honesty of this, and of this album, and of this band. This is an amazing work of art from a band that just made one amazing work of art after another. And I'm sure that, I will... at some point down the road, I know that I will make more videos about them, and I will at some point talk about some of Bob's stuff, especially Sugar, and some of Grant's stuff, especially The Argument, a monumental fucking masterpiece of an album. So anyway, but this is a masterpiece right here at a time where they just were making one after another. They couldn't stop themselves. So an amazing band. If you've never heard this, go check it out. And if you have heard it, hopefully I've inspired you to hear it maybe in a different way, and maybe hopefully shift some of the context around how they're spoken about or thought about. Who knows? Maybe. Lofty goals. Very lofty goals. At any rate, that just about wraps things up here. I feel like I say this a lot lately. We have a few more subscribers, so welcome, subscribers. Thank you very much for subscribing. And if you have not subscribed yet or would like to, now's the time. Why not? What's stopping you? So like and comment and subscribe. And if you are a Husker Du fan, I would love to hear. I feel like for hardcore fans, I feel like they already like these things and they don't need me to come along. I'm just trying to do this for maybe more for the novice out there. I don't know. But like I said, or just to, again, just talk about them in a slightly different way, which hopefully I have achieved that. So anyway, I'm gonna gonna go to bed now. So it's very late. So so thank you for watching, and like I said, please like, comment, and subscribe, and all of the YouTube things. And I will be back very soon with another exciting episode. So until then, everybody, bye.